good decision. Oh, and we're recording this as
Yeah,
well.
sorry about that.
By the way, we're gonna actually share with you some of our experiences, and then that will help to kind of frame how we've come up with this discussion in the first place. So why is this discussion important? Why is it even taking place? Well, career decision making isn't as simple as, do you go down path A or path B? It's not, do I stay or do I go? There are thoughts, feelings, emotions that all impact our behavior. And all of these have a significant impact on our well-being. So that could be anything from your happiness, your health, your wealth, and your relationships within the workplace, and also your relationships outside the workplace at home. So our goal for this discussion is to give you some skills, some tools, some resources to potentially take the blinkers off a little bit with regards to your career decision making, and also to arm you with the skills to be confident in your career decision making, so that you can look back on the decisions that you make today and look back and say, do you know what, I'm proud of what I did 3, 5, 10 years ago, because ultimately what the decisions you make today will have an impact on what happens further down the line. So that should hopefully kind of frame what we're going to do today. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. So John, do you just want to go into a little bit of detail about what we're going to cover today?
Lovely, great stuff. Good to see everybody here. Thanks for joining us. Do feel free to fire on your videos if you want to. It's good to see some pretty faces looking back at us, but if not, no problem at all. Hopefully we get to see you at the end. So just at the start here, we're just going to orientate what we're going to get through. We're going to discuss briefly some common challenges, and I'm sure a lot of which will resonate with you. And as Josh has mentioned already, please do feel free to use the reactions button if you feel like some of the things that we're talking about chime with you. If not, we will break out into more question opportunities at the end, and we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. But as Josh has mentioned, we're looking to really state and raise what are the common issues and felt problems that we all have and we all go through. Figure out what can we do to turn some of those problems or stresses into solutions, purely based on our experiences. We don't profess to be career experts, and therefore not trying to give career guidance, so to speak, but this really is the delivery based on our experiences, our insights, and burnt lessons along the way, which we're looking to reframe into opportunities for you guys. You're going to hear a lot of real insight along the way as well, a lot of open and honest conversations from us. So, do feel free to open the doors a little bit on some of your questions at the end, and we can dive into anything if you've got questions as we go. Do feel free to use the chat function as well to drop those into, and one of us will pick that up at the end. Okay, away we go. So, as I mentioned briefly, between us all, we can pretty much relate to some of the common pressures in sports coaching that we have, whether that be working long and unsociable hours, often compromising time with friends, family, loved ones, and we commit a large amount of our time to becoming good at our job and creating a future which we're really ambitious about and really proud of. But a lot of those issues can often compound latent stresses, which, if left undealt with over time, definitely become more conscious and felt pressures and stresses which emulate in our behaviors and mindset. So what we want to really deliver, or we want to try and talk through a lot of the time in today, is get through some of some of the overwhelming thoughts, feelings, and emotions that we suffer day to day, which impact our delivery, which impact who we want to be as a person, and impact who we are at home as well. And some of you may or may not recognize some of the things at the start here, where we talk about sometimes when you're under pressure and stress within a certain role or opportunity you've got, sometimes you are looking at, is the grass greener elsewhere? What if it's worse if I go somewhere else? Can I improve upon my current circumstances? Maybe I'll try and move my environment to somewhere else. What if the expectations I set against myself are too high? Am I even able to achieve what I'm setting out to work for in this current opportunity? And what can I do to change that? Often what will fall out in the end of this is that we tell ourselves we're not really good enough. Sometimes I can't do this. I should be better than I am. I'm not smart enough. Nobody cares. And if I don't do well, I'm a failure. It's quite catastrophic and illogical, some of that thought process at times, all because of the pressures, unaddressed pressures and stresses that we're often feeling day to day, which then emulate into negative feelings. So quite often, and I've certainly been in a position where it's certainly quite common to not feel often valued. We give so much of ourselves an opportunity, and sometimes we don't feel the value come back. Sometimes you feel that your voice isn't heard. Suddenly it's not having the impact. Maybe the respect that you once felt you had or could command with your peer group or a group that you're working with, a group of athletes, is changing, or you may feel anxious about those engagements. And then suddenly that snowballs into feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And then you're starting to question every single interaction that you have. And you arrive at a point where you go, do you know what? I'm just not sure this is for me anymore. This equally snowballs into a series of negative emotions. And you can list through here, and I'm sure that along the way, some of us, if not all of you, have experienced this list. And I know myself and Josh certainly have, for sure, from some of our conversations. This all emulates into lifestyle impacts. So we arrive at a point where day to day, we start to really erode and devalue our self-worth as people and practitioners. We begin to question our thought process, begin to question our actions, and we're doubtful about our future in the current role, leading to feelings of uncertainty of, how do I improve upon this, or what is next? What's the logical step for me? Because I'm now feeling overwhelmed, I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I'm angry that the role or the opportunity that I chose for myself now hasn't played out in the way that I imagined. And what can I do about that? Of course, you can't just be this all-consumed giving individual whose role is often to serve individuals 24/7 at work and not take some of that home. And there are impacts that are felt upon your partner, your family. I can relate to a time when I was working in rugby league, Super League. Phenomenal opportunity, but a lot of that stuff, the pressures, the stresses, the overwhelm was coming home, and it was having a huge impact on my partner, was soon to be my wife at the time, who was pregnant with her first child. I wasn't there. I wasn't consciously there often enough because of the pressures that I was struggling to cope with and the overwhelm that I was suffering at work. I wasn't able to separate the two of me. It was the same person bringing those stresses right back home and having an impact at the core of my lifestyle, which was my family, my partner, my future. Of course, it's really, really common at that stage to be thinking about, right, if I am going to change my circumstance, what about my finances? What will that mean? And then suddenly another stressor pops in. You're thinking about your need to serve, you need to provide, you need to protect. So in a roundabout way, you finish with, where can I go next? Inevitably, you think about, there's going to be stiff competition for a job or a role that I think I might like to slide into next. Am I going to need to acquire certain education or certificates on top of that to upskill? Am I going to possibly have to move house? The likelihood is often yes. So we're faced with what feels like a wall of risk, a wall of pressure, and a wall of doubt, which we can't climb over because of all these negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions that compound and weigh in on who we are. Josh, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I've had exactly the same things happen before. Mine was actually in a job trying to get out, and let's take it from the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, all the way through to the impact, and all of everything that you just read out on that list. This what I felt, and what I want to take that to the next level and say what was happening in my behavior and my actions. Well, I wasn't present. I became quite aggressive, actually. It's a bit of a bad story, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's honest and it's true. At one point, I was so disillusioned with what I was doing and where my career was because of the inability to process and make these decisions properly, that there was some road rage incident where this lorry driver had cut me up and I chased him down the motorway. I wasn't even going on the motorway, but I chased him down. Picture this, he's driving a blooming 5-ton truck or 2-ton truck, and I'm in a little Volkswagen Up, just driving down, like chasing him, hooting, like flicking him off and thinking, what the hell am I doing? Absolutely crazy. He's throwing stuff out the window at me. And I sit back and I pulled into a lay-by after I calmed down. I thought, what am I doing? Like, that is the impact that my inability to make a decent decision is having on my actual behavior. And that's an extreme example, but there are other things that do take place. And for me personally, that was things in addition to that. It was like a total lack of presence, a doubling down on what I was doing. Now, a doubling down in effort also means removing effort from somewhere else. So that got removed from my family and my friends. I totally cast them aside because no, I need to put all my time and attention into work. all because I wasn't making good decisions. So it's hugely impactful at every single one of those stages. But if you can get left of that bang, like to steal a military phrase, left of bang is what happens before an explosion, a firefight, something takes place. And then you can create standard operating procedures which allow that to be avoided or mitigated in the future, or the severity reduced. And essentially that's what we're talking about here. But I just wanted to share that couple of quick examples with you.
Thanks for that, Josh. Okay, so we've covered initially some of the emotional turmoil, the negative self-talk. What's really important from here is that we begin to understand how we can take action and we can manage and cope, and at times shift our mindset from places of thoughts, feelings, emotions that are derailing our thought process, as Josh just talked about in a story, misguiding our decisions, and meaning that we're somebody else that we don't really quite want to be or we don't like so much. So the first thing to state here is that, throughout our career, as I mentioned at the start, we'll all experience similar demands and pressures, but the individual response to that stress is often very different because purely we're individuals. And the ability to improve upon your current circumstances really and achieve your professional goals, your personal goals and expectations you set for yourself definitely result in today's outcomes. So as Josh was talking about, the decisions you make today affect and impact the opportunities that you have tomorrow. So being more conscious about your starting point and having a greater understanding of your insights and your awareness means that you're able to start to recognize when you're going in a direction that you don't want to be going in and how you can do something about it. For those of you who have read Professor Steve Peters' work in the Chimp Paradox, will be familiar with this framework here. But in order for us to do something about some of the problems that we're facing and how we can alleviate those issues or mitigate them, as Josh was talking about, we need to have a bit of quite a simple and a pure understanding about what's going on with this framework that we have in having our minds here. And you can see we've got these two squares, the L, which refers to the logical brain, and the survival, which refers to the survival brain. We've got these two machines running non-stop all the time. One of the problems that we face, however, is that the logical brain, or the human thinking, which is in our prefrontal cortex, that is small, and we think sometimes that the survival brain is 5 times larger and greater than the size of the logical brain. And therefore, the survival brain will often override thoughts of logical, rational thought, common sense, for feelings of or impressions which drive into emotional thinking, because our brain is the first thing to say, we perceive there's a threat, there's a danger, there's a pressure, we might want to do something about this. What then happens, or at the same time rather, we've got then the computer brain, which stores a lot of that information. The computer is fed by the actions, the beliefs, and the talk delivered from the survival brain and logical brain. And that then becomes our mantra, it becomes our experience, it becomes our foresight, it becomes the knowledge that we tell ourselves. So therefore, the challenge is how we begin to impact this back and forth exchange from survival brain to the computer, so that we can begin to get a hold and get a grip of how do we respond when we face X? What do we do when we come against Y? And how can we manage that in such a way that gives us some positive outcomes and not negative ones in such an example that Josh gave, or starting to do things which are against, I'm not thinking rationally. I'm not making decisions in the manner that I would. I'm not being myself at home. I'm more irritable. I'm more frustrated. And you start to take it out on other people. One of the key things here is that over time, we learn that we need to reframe thinking. And of course, in psychology, this is often what these experts are doing when they're trying to get athletes to go from a place of underperformance or doubt into more positive and confident steps. And there's an approach taken to challenge what information we've put into the computer and to ask, what truths do we know to be true? How do we want to live our lifestyle? And what decisions do we need to make against what we've told ourselves?
That's a good time, John. Sorry, yeah. I'll jump in there. That's a good time for me to kind of show the other side of the coin and flip the other side of the coin. Like, we don't want to, neither of us want this to come across as a negative discussion and conversation. And it's not all about bad decisions. It's important to draw reference to what actually takes place or what the process is when good decisions happen. So every good decision I've ever made in my career that has worked out well, and there have been a lot, have taken place because of a really clearly defined set of principles, or like bumpers at the bowling alley. It guided me towards the right decision. And anyone who knows me will know I've had a bit of a wacky career path, which has taken me all around the globe. And that's because that's what I designed and that's what I wanted for myself. So India, Romania, France, done work in Italy, and all sorts of random tasks and random jobs within that. But the reason why I made decisions to either stay or go to a particular job or from a job were in line with the four things that were fundamentally important to me. And John is going to go on to this, but it involved me reframing my thinking and going back to basics. So almost my absolute fundamentals of my core were four key things, and every opportunity had to align to those four key things. Growth. Was this opportunity going to allow me to grow as both a person and as a practitioner? Adventure. Was this opportunity going to give me endless adventure, both from a cultural and immersive perspective and within the role itself? Then the next one would be challenge. Am I going to be challenged in the actual environment that I live in and the workplace as well? I don't think there's much more challenging than dropping yourself into the middle of the fields of India. So I've actually kind of lived these challenges and tried to really apply those principles. And the final one is my life, my path. It's for me. I'm designing it and I'm creating it for me, for no one else, and for me and my family and the people who are important to me. So those were the four things that have always been fundamental to me. And that kind of segues nicely into the next section that John will go into, but it's not all doom and gloom. Like, you can make bad decisions, and you do make bad decisions in your life, but every one of those good decisions I've made were made for the right reasons and led on to the next thing, because they were good decisions based on absolute core values and principles. So that's the point I want to make, that's the other side of the coin when things are positive. So
absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that as well. And I refer back to a role that I took in Super League, and at the time it was an incredibly exciting opportunity. I was finishing up and wrapping up a PhD, and I was looking for the next step. I looked at the opportunity that came through, and I made decisions that were based on, if I was honest with myself, ego, insecurity, the badge, the opportunity. I made it very much about the job, about the prospect of going to an environment like that. What I didn't do was ask more questions of that environment or the opportunity and say, does that environment or does that role, do the people in that place align with what I want? Does it match my ambitions? Do they match my values? Do we have similar values and impressions about how we want to do our work in this place? And how will that suit my lifestyle? I uprooted myself, my family, and we went and we started, and we had our first child when we were there. But I can honestly say, despite how excited I was about the prospects of the opportunity and what I thought it would do for my credibility, my influence, my opportunity for, say, going up the ladder further down the line, it did none of those things for me, because I was miserable, because I was in an environment working with other people that we just, our ambitions didn't click. And I think fundamentally I was there for the wrong reasons. It was the ego driving such decisions rather than asking, how does this environment serve me, and are we going to work well together?
John, I've heard you say before, people, project, environment when it comes to an opportunity. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit for everybody?
I think those three things are often key tenets when we're thinking about what's going to excite us about an opportunity, or what do we want to look for in an opportunity. I think commonplace tells us that we want to work with people that we align with, that we don't often always have to agree with, but we feel we can work with in a really constructive way, and we want similar challenge, we offer similar support, and we have similar ways of doing what we want to achieve. In other words, we're all on the same hymn sheet and we have value to add. Environment, in the sense that hopefully the culture, the behaviors, the habits of that environment is an environment that you feel you can contribute to, that you're valued in, and that other people in that environment share and value what you bring to the table as well. And the last one, Josh, remind me, was
people, project, environment.
Project. And the opportunity to work on projects and areas of work that inspire you, fulfill you, make you excited to get out of bed every single day and get to work before somebody else. And at a time in the Super League role, as I gave the example before, I probably had none of those 3 boxes ticked. I wasn't inspired, I wasn't creative, and I certainly wasn't giving my best self. So it then became a task of, I went back to the start, as I went through at the beginning, and had all the negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions that we've just discussed. And it was then about making the jump. And then I looked to make more of a pragmatic step with, right, what qualities do I want to see in the environment that I'm going to move to? How do the people, the projects, the environment suit some of my needs and ambitions? And how can I align myself to that environment as well? Do we fit? Is there synergy? And there certainly was. But, you know, I got a question earlier today as well, which came through Twitter, and it was about values and where they really come from. We've talked a little bit about the importance of making values and making decisions aligned with our values. And everything to date with myself was that I'd made decisions that weren't wholeheartedly often in line with those values. And every time I did that, I got burned. I got burned against my own expectations. And anything that followed was negative connotations. So in order to make better decisions more consistently, I learned that starting to make better decisions in line with values meant that, first of all, I had to establish what those values were. I had to get to a place where I was beginning to understand that the importance of having some values and beginning to look at those as known truths, as evidence and as facts that were important, that I would hold against, that would keep me anchored in certain decisions and give me a framework with which to move from. Oftentimes when we don't have a framework, we're making decisions emotionally, irrationally, without logic, and maybe without facts and evidence that help us base decisions on strong standing. And so one of the things that Josh and I have often talked about and we'll share with our mentees is, if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. You have to be able to take a step back and take on some inflection and begin to look at what are the things that inspire you, what are your wants and needs, and who do you want to be? And oftentimes when you take a step back, you'll be able to look at a range of things and say, oh, I want to be a compassionate guy. I want to be authentic. I want to be kind. I want to be generous. I want to be hardworking. I want to be ambitious. And you can begin to choose and settle upon certain values, which then become your core values or your guiding principles, as Josh will often relate to. But then these become your principles with which you have a framework to begin assessing the qualities of people you want to work with, opportunities you want to say yes and no to, and how you can begin to make some confident decisions, which you know you will be proud of over time. And every time I can say that I've done that, I've definitely never looked back and thought that was a wrong move for the wrong reasons. It's always been more of a genuine and well thought out option. Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Like when you make a decision that's in line with your core values, you stand by it, and you stand by it thick or thin. Whether it turns out later down the line to be wrong or not, you know you made it for the right reasons at the right time. So it was the right decision because it was right then. There's one thing I want to add to the values, and this is where it becomes really interesting. There'll be people on this call who don't know where they want to be in 3, 5, 10 years time. There'll be people who listen to this who don't know these things. And that's absolutely fine. When you can combine some personal values with a vision, then that's when everything clicks together. And a vision doesn't have to mean I want to be head of S&C for Man United. It could be I want to manage people. I want to be in a managerial position, in a role. I want to earn at least my age. I want to have evenings and weekends free. At some point in the future, I want to have kids. I'd like to go to this place in the world. I'd like to work abroad. Like, these things are quite broad, but you can then start to look at an opportunity and you say, is this in line with my values? And is this in line with where I want to be? And it's not assigned to a role anymore. It's assigned to you as a person. And when you can start to do that, like, you know, the blinkers just totally and utterly come off. I can think of an example when I sat on a beach in the off season from the rugby club I was at. And I said to the person I was with, I don't want my life to be like this anymore. I was desperately unhappy. And that was the moment I literally took my blinkers off. I said, look, I've always wanted to work abroad and I really want to do it. And I set my mind to it at that point. And this was about flicking a switch, I suppose. Within 3 weeks of 2 weeks of going back to the UK, I had 3 interviews for jobs abroad, one in Hong Kong, one in Saudi, one in India, all completely random places, incidentally. Within a week after that, I had 3 offers, and 2 weeks after that, I was on a plane to India. Needless to say, I chose the weirdest, wackiest, least, most challenging, most in line with my values that allowed me to grow, adventure, and live my life and path. So my point is, I had that vision. I didn't necessarily know all the intricacies of the job, but I didn't need to, because the decision was going to work out as it was supposed to, because it was in line with values and vision.
Absolutely. And along that, I think one of the problems that we'll often come up against, and I certainly felt through my career, and one thing we haven't spoken about is we do understand that there are probably, if you could separate the coaching career or the lifespan of a coach into segments. And Josh, I know you've done this, but there's going to be people at the primitive end and people at the experienced end. And well, I think when you sit in each one of those categories, you want different things for obvious reasons. And going back to the question I got earlier today, are the values that we establish for ourselves things that we choose early on and we live with all the way through, or do they change and do they move? And for me, they definitely changed. And what I wanted for me as now a 36-year-old is not what I wanted for myself as a 22-year-old. I was very, very happy to be immersive and all in. I was 24/7. I made my business very much about building skills, qualities, and credentials that would open the doors and enable me to be a better coach. But it was always about progression. It was always about being immersive and being the best, getting the best opportunities. What I lost was the foresight along that path, was to check what direction I was headed in. Because before I knew it, I did all the things that I told myself as a young guy that I wanted to do, which was get married and have children. And then I was working in a really good environment. And then suddenly my first child came into the world. And you talk about blinkers, Josh. My blinkers were moved overnight. And it was suddenly this innate need to protect, serve, and provide. So what was once my prize career that I developed over at that time about a decade, was that my primary objective became the primary asset for the family overnight. It changed. My values changed. My needs changed. And therefore my thought process started to change. And the content that I had in a position started to move because my circumstances personally had moved. And I started to evaluate the qualities and the opportunities that would come for me from that role as a means to provide for my family in the future that I'd be looking at. What would retirement look like? What would I have for me then? And at that point, I became a little bit unstuck because the reasons I'd chosen the role that I was in at the time weren't the same reasons I wanted to stay. So I started to innovate. I started to take that deep reflection and think about, right, what are my values now going forward? And 3 things jumped right off the page for me, which was family, fulfillment, and finance, which when you signed up, I'm sure you saw that in the title. And they become 3 core headings that I would decide to use as a framework with which to check, challenge, and make better decisions from. Family, for me, it was all about, can I still do what I love, but spend the time at home with a family that I want and what they need? And how will that look across the course of the season? Those of you on the call who work in football or any team sports at the moment, I certainly have. It's all encompassing. And we accept the conditions when we take such roles in the right manner, that we're going to provide a service in the details that you need in the stages of the year that you want. And we sign up for that. We agree with that. But naturally, the yardstick changes and we want to flip it back into our control, as I did, because my commitments have changed. The second point of fulfillment, being completely immersive as a coach, wanting to be the best I could possibly be, get great roles, great opportunities, and learn. That was still very much in the forefront of my mind. But fulfillment was also now about being able to share my experiences, maybe take on some more responsibilities and nurture or mentor other people around me and start to give some of those lessons back, because you begin to work with younger individuals, younger peers. I wanted to still be excited about what I was working on. I wanted to still think and perform in an ambitious manner. That was fulfillment for me. I wanted to still be passionate about what I was doing. And the finance is another contentious point. And Josh, you flashed across it before, but when you're a coach of, let's say, a decade in and more, it's very, very natural, because your life circumstances dictate that you will begin to criticize or critique, for a better word, the value that you're taking home in a monetary manner, and how that might change over time. Because you have a family to provide for. I've got 3 children now, and when you have needs that grow like that as a small football team, you begin to evaluate the returns of your time a little bit more effectively. And so long and short is that family fulfillment and finance became day to day a set of decisions where I thought, how does this align with that? And what I decided upon was that if what my current actions and decisions and or behaviors weren't aligned or congruent with my framework, then that didn't fit for me anymore. And over time, naturally, when you're working for someone else as an employee, as an example, I was built to serve in that environment. And I wanted to flip it back the other way and go, well, how can I build a life by design? And how can I get to a point where I'm in control, but still yet can achieve the family fulfillment finance and not change things radically, but still do what I did, but in a different manner. And that enabled me and settled me through what was quite a risky move to step away from a permanent contract, where I went into my boss and said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. He said, you're absolutely nuts. You've got a permanent contract and you've just had 2 children. What are you doing? But I was so compelled by the framework that I'd set for myself, knowing that that was my future, it didn't matter whether I was permanent or not. And the risk becomes less like a stone wall that you're smacking your head against, and more like a wall that you can break down.
I think this is great because there's some. I'm quite different in a lot of ways, and I'm different because, but we've settled on the same framework. Like, we've created a framework together, but from different standpoints. So I want a wacky life. I want a grandkid sat on my knee, bouncing them up and down, saying, "Oh, did I ever tell you the story about when the shepherd blew up in Romania, or when the athlete in India got bitten by a cobra? Like, did I ever tell you that story?" And the kid's like, "What? You lived in India?" Yeah. And that's what I want. That's my vision. That's part of my vision. So every decision that I make has to fill those boxes. And I do have a kid. It's called Bam Bam. And what I try to do is ensure that if I'm good, like if I'm good in myself and in my decisions, and I'm clear on my decisions, then everything's going to work out. So it's a little bit of a trust the universe. It's this blend that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but when it does, it's awesome, between a dreamer and then a planner. So the difference between a dream is action, isn't it? A dream and reality is action. So putting the steps in place, and that's where the framework allows me to continue to be a dreamer, to continue to be focused on growth, adventure, challenge, and my life, my path. That's where that can still take place, and I can still provide for my kid and have this wacky life and lifestyle. So it just shows how you've got like a fairly rigid line, you can wave up and down from that line. You can be this end of it, that end of it, but as long as you've got that framework and that's kind of those guiding principles, then things are going to work out for you.
Very much so. Very much so. Okay, lovely. This might be a good time to dive into the Q&A, Josh.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat function, and perhaps we can dive a little bit deeper over areas that maybe we've skimmed over, or you want to ask a question which is maybe more relating to you and your circumstance, and maybe something we've mentioned has resonated with you. We do have some questions that came in prior as well, which we can dig into if we're waiting for a few to come through.
Yeah, so I'll so we don't sit in awkward silence. I will have a look at some of the questions here. Okay, so one of the questions that came in that got sent in by someone who had applied, I'm not sure if they're on the call or not, was how do you say no? How do you say no to a role when they're so scarce in the industry, when you don't have, when the salaries are poor or low, when the salary is just, the package is embarrassing? So how do you actually say no when you're desperate to get in? So this was from someone who was trying to kind of get onto the ladder. So I'll lead out with this one, and then John, you can chuck in your 2 pennies as well. I think it comes down to, again, values and principles, but it also comes down to your barriers and what your kind of non-negotiables are. You should have non-negotiables, even if you are earlier on in your career. So what are your barriers and what are your non-negotiables? They change from person to person, but it's that true understanding that this industry does. So it's kind of eyes wide open. This industry does have the ability to take every single thing that you're prepared to give. So if you can define what you are and are not prepared to give, then that's the maximum amount that the industry can ever take from you. I mean, John, what are your thoughts?
I would say that I think all you're really concerned about when you're, say, a graduate coach and you're looking to get some experience and a foot on the ladder is that you're acutely aware of the supply-demand challenge that we're up against, aren't you? I think we're all very aware that we've got a large coaching pool, very, very strong academically, huge horsepower in that sense. But potentially, certainly in the pro sports setting, the opportunities that are there for us maybe aren't as balanced as we like to. So you, as you said, for fear of being overlooked for an opportunity or fear of standing out against your peers and looking at things a little bit differently, you take the role, you leap. And I think it's an incredibly healthy thing to do as well. I don't think any of us would say at this point you should make every decision should be always 100% of the time carefully calculated and collected. It can't always be. You can only make a decision with the evidence that you've got in front of you and what you know to be true. We've arrived at this point where we're able to look back with hindsight and say there's some things that we really should have done differently because it would have hugely impacted who we are now, our family, and maybe even our bank balance. But it's only with that foresight that we can do that. So it's really important to say yes to opportunities still, and sometimes get burned a little bit, but take forward those lessons and put it into the computer that I was talking about before, so that when you're faced in a similar situation, you don't have to say yes. I actually think that saying no is one of the most important qualities that as a coach long in the tooth or high performing individual should be able to say, because you should be able to protect your time as well. And your time is your greatest quality, your greatest asset. And if you're giving that willingly to other people who don't value it in the same sense that you do and pay you commensurately for that value, that's where conflict can arrive from. So there's no often right or wrong way to say for a 20-year-old or a very specific circumstance, but I would largely say take those opportunities and learn from them, but also do so in a sense that means you're not allowing other people to always take advantage of you, and obviously look to try and create and collect as many skills, credentials, be that soft or hard skills that enable you to open the doors that you really do want to step into further down the line.
Yeah, great. We have a question coming from Lewis Charnock. Hopefully I pronounced that right. So John, can you talk us through how you got through the uncertainty of being in a permanent role to bite the bullet and go ahead and move your career on?
It was hard. It was hard. What I knew to be true was that I was in a permanent role, working with a great team, and Lewis was a colleague of mine at the time. Very happy in the team that we had, very content in the work, doing great work, having impact, having value. But the pillar of family was probably calling the strongest for me, and that was what was making my thought process shift toward looking to change my circumstance. And what I started to question was, why had I always followed the status quo? Because I think often when you're going through, certainly through my pathway at least, hopefully it resonates with other people too, but you go through school, college, university, you're taught the cultural acceptance stance is that you will get higher grades as you possibly can, high quality as you possibly can, get a high paid job, go and get employed. And I follow the pathway through. And certainly when you're going around other environments and you're going to, say, conferences like the UKSCA, and you're seeing these outstanding individuals present their work, and that looks really attractive, potentially the lifestyle that they have, certainly the opportunity that they have. And I wanted that. And I began to really wrestle with, I thought that was my ideal. I thought that was my pathway. Second to that, I think leaving employment to self-employment isn't always a path well trodden. It's certainly not a known route. There's not a job you can apply for like in the way that you would online. So you have to create your own conditions. But coming back around to the values I made before, the family fulfillment and finance enabled me to look at, what do I need to do from a time point of view? So I'll start with time first. And I built my conditions on time. And I thought non-negotiable terms, I'm only going to work this amount of time if I can, and then I'll try and build everything else around it. And then it was about reaching out to other individuals that potentially would open a door for me, and I could work on people, projects, and environments that were incredibly fulfilling. And then you have to put your balls on the line, so to speak, and say, this is what I'm prepared to charge. And again, that's quite a risky turn to move into as well. What made the jump a little bit easier in my own circumstance was I had a small contract, but I still had to find at least 50% of my salary to make it work. So the goal was year one, break even, and then iterate and improve from there. One last thing I would add to this is that most coaches that I speak to who have an interest in going self-employed or an interest in doing side hustles don't have an income strategy. And that is probably one of the biggest falls that people suffer with, because we have all this great USP, this huge academic horsepower, the great insight where we can work with huge populations, ranging populations. And yet we fail to really think about what terms we want to do business on, and in a monetary sense, how we will position our service. So quite quickly, it's looking across a series of products or services that you will have and agree on the terms that will give you the stability that you're seeking for. And I think most people avoid the uncertainty of self-employment, certainly from insights that I've gathered, because the earning, the salary is less known. We're not on a month-to-month guarantee. So it's trying to take the uncertain and make it more stable.
John, that's a good segue for Owen's question. So the question was, John, when you jumped ship, what did you learn that you didn't know about running a successful business, and how did you upskill in those areas?
Great question. It was evident that I knew coaching, but not business. And in some respects, I went back to some of my earliest experiences of being a waiter, being an audio technician in health, as like some of those real primitive examples about service, about customer care, about diligence, the little things that I'm sure some of the older heads often think today that maybe some of the younger crowd coming through, we would love to have. And that really set me up for, this is the level above that I must deliver to. But in terms of business, I went into a business mentor. I decided to commit money I didn't have into that avenue, upskill quick, and then begin to make some decisions in business that I knew was going to be more secure, and I wasn't just kind of fluff and fall my way through to success. But one of the things that, and I offer it as a resource every time I speak to people, I would really highly recommend to folks who are looking at maybe self-employment is a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And if you haven't checked it out, you should. And one of the things, and I'm digressing here, but is incredibly powerful, is about how it challenges our consensus around earning money. And there's a quadrant, there's a way he talks about basically employment, passive, consulting, and investment. And that if you truly want financial freedom and freedom that gives you security, you need to be stepping into and trying to earn and invest in all of those four quadrants. And if you're not, then you're at risk, because as I had done for 13 years before going self-employed, I'd been employed, a guaranteed salary. I was only earning one of the quadrants, so I was time poor and financially poor elsewhere. So that was probably one of the best things I did as well. But go and learn from individuals, if at all possible, who have been where you want to go and have done what you want to do.
I'll add to that. I know that's not my question, but I'll add to it because I'm very early on in the self-employed journey this time round. And the best thing I've done is employ people who know what they're doing in a very specific area. So I don't know diddly squat about marketing. So I went and hired somebody at what actually was quite a high price to help to actually design a strategy for me. I don't know. I'm useless at social media content. So I had someone create some templates for me and paid for them to do that. I'm useless at, I've outsourced pretty much anything that I can, despite the fact I can't really afford to do that, but I'm doing it because they'll produce a much higher standard, and that allows me to do the things that I'm good at. I think I'm all right at, which is the creative side and the good idea ferrying. So what my point is there is actually take something by the nuts, focusing on what you are really good at or that you feel you're good at, and outsource all the rest.
Very good.
Okay. Oh, here we go. This is for me. Josh, what would you say are the potential barriers of return to more conventional roles back home in the future? And how would you use your experiences abroad to your advantage? Yes, good question. Firstly, I have absolutely zero intention of going back to the UK. Number one, because Boris is a bell end. And number two, because I don't right now think that it aligns with my principles, which are growth, adventure, challenge, my life, my path, and finally my boys in France. So this is me. But what would I need to do? I would need to find something that allowed me to live in line with those principles, and it would allow me to. My goal now is to create career blueprints to the level and the point that I can be anywhere and do it anytime. That allows me to have those three key things that are important to me. And that's my primary goal right now. But I love coaching, and I always want to be able to do it. To be fair, I could move back to the UK if it wasn't for little Bam Bam, but I don't want to. So I'm happy having the adventures all the way.
Josh, let me throw this this next one at you from Bojen Chen. When you face failure, how to decide when to keep fighting or give up? I know you've come across your fair amount of adversity. What were your lessons from that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Like I've very recently been through a stage where every single like aspect of character has been bashed about. That's confidence, that's like literally anything that you can imagine. But one thing that never fades and never will is self-belief. Maybe that's a trait or something, a characteristic that's ingrained. Maybe it's how I was brought up, I don't know. But because that is the case, I always know that I will find a way. I always used to say this, that maybe it's a stupid quote, maybe it's not, but I've never had a problem I can't outwork. Now, I would change that now to say, I've never had a problem I can't outwork until I get to the point where I don't have the skills, and then I'll find someone who does. So there's the little caveat under that there's always a way forward. And there is something I think I maybe even stole this on Owen. It's about failing forward. He definitely has said, fail forward, fail fast, fail often. But how you approach and how you can look at those failures and take positives from them, that's huge. There is always something you can learn, but sometimes it will take the right sort of reflection to be able to do that. So that's where the reflective practice comes in, really. Yeah, there is a certain point where you have to say, is this in line with my values, yes or no? And then you question absolutely everything, but you do it fast and you do it slow. So thinking fast, thinking slow, deciding fast, deciding slow. There's definitely a book about that. Owen will probably type it in the chat because he knows exactly what it is. In fact, he's doing it right now. And essentially, you will get to the point, or hopefully you can get to the point as a person when you say, like, that's not right for me. No, that's not in line with my guiding principles. That's not in line with my vision. And then there are other times when you have to sit back and say, you know what? I need to consider this from multiple angles. I need to be challenged on my thinking from my anti-echo chamber. I need to be deeply digging into why I want to make this change or move. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that kind of answers the question, but some of these we can elaborate on a little bit more if we need to. Yeah, let's have a look at the last. This will probably be the last one. I'm just conscious of your guys' time. When you have both faced negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions, practically, what tactics have you both used to bring yourself into the present moment, mindful state, and you can access your decision frameworks? I'm going to go very quickly before John. I know he's definitely got something. I stole this from the Special Forces guys. I know that it is not particularly original, but it's something that's very effective in the heat of battle, I suppose, for them. It was 3 R's. So it was recognize, reset, refocus. Recognize can be understanding that there's something going on, that this isn't how you want it to be, and recognizing that there is a problem. And the Reset could be something physical. People have probably heard about a snap band. So it might be a little elastic band or something, or some physical, like a little pinch, or something that is creating a physical response as well as an emotional one. And in addition to that, it can be actually speaking the words out loud, is almost like having a conversation with yourself. And then the final one is reset, refocus. Okay, what is it I need to do, or when was the last time I did this correctly? What did it look like? And how do I get back to that? So what is correct execution of this skill? What is correct execution of this behavior, this action that I want? So yeah, I mean, hopefully that's a really quick whistle stop tour on that one. John?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I mean, we've been through hopefully a lot of the journey that we go through, from starting with fear, pressure, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and then turning and reframing it into more logical and helpful thought. If you want to go and read more about that area, I would definitely recommend that you look at the Spotlight psychometric profile, which come from the guys at Insights. I've done quite a few of those over time, and it continues to be, I think, one of the best ones that gives you a rule book, or a bit of a framework, I should say, to lead from afterwards, and understand a bit more about yourself and how you can make better decisions going forward. But along the lines of what we talked about really today.
Guys, what we're going to do now is I'm going to wrap up, or we're going to wrap up, but we do still have another question. If you do have more, I'm going to hang around. I'm not sure if you're able to or not, John, but I'm going to hang around and I'm going to take on any more questions. So Ed, I know you've got one there. If you have a few minutes, I'll address that for you if you want to. So guys, first of all, thank you for joining us. It's great to be able to put out ideas and thoughts. There's nothing new under the sun. We've created these thoughts because we've created these frameworks because this is what we see in the industry. I think there's a lot of people on this call. There's a lot of people that signed up because we understand that there might be some issues with regards to our decision-making and our careers. We create these frameworks because we want people to make good decisions and avoid some of the mistakes that we made, and the feelings that come attached to that, and the behaviors. So the model that we've created is called the Triple F model: family, fulfillment, and finance. We've turned that into both a manual and a short course. The manual will be essentially a step-by-step guide of what you need to do, and to take control, make decisions that you're proud of, to avoid and overcome the overwhelm and the anxiety. And the short course is holding your hand and guiding you through every step of the way with specific tasks as to how to develop and evolve in each specific area. So what we've done is, for everyone who's been on this call and that we send the recording to, we'll drop you an early bird discount for these. And the manual will be coming out in the next, oh dear John, about a week's time. No pressure, mate. And we will keep in touch via email and let you know all the details on that. So that's what we're actually trying to do about some of these problems and solutions. We can't cover everything about career decision making in 1 hour. It's like absolutely impossible. But what we can do is hopefully have given you a little bit of an insight as to how frameworks can be really beneficial for you, and also show you a pathway and a direction for mastering something that will serve you for the rest of your life. So with that in mind, thank you so much from me. Your time is really valuable to us, and I know time full stop is valuable. So we're really grateful that you've joined us. We will be sending out this recording. And for anybody who wants to stay, please do so, because we'll field a couple more questions. If not, then have a superb day.
Thanks all. Thank you.
So I'll just keep going. Ed, hello. Thank you both for insight. Webinar, values versus value. Good opening. I like it already. Do you think there's some issues we are wrestling with in terms of our profession with regards to employed positions or employment, such as remuneration? I always get that one wrong. And positive working conditions are because coaches might be well aligned with their values and certain valued knowledge, services, skills, knowledge. Okay, John, that's you. That's got you written all over it.
Sorry, Ed. I perhaps puzzle myself on the last piece. Do you want to unmute yourself, Ed? And you feel free to talk.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfect. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, I think it's that just the distinguishing, I think, between values, which I really like what you presented on, and how important it is in terms of our decision making process. But I do wonder if for a lot of coaches, they are, because of the nature of coaching and the reflective processes, etc. I think the softest, most of our professional, I think, are quite good at the softer skills and are quite in touch with themselves, quite emotionally intelligent. Do you think there is that the uncertainty of actually what the value of the services are is a part of what enables there to be such a range in people's understanding of what their position is worth? And I think that's almost whether or not we're in employment, or whether we move, once we move into a self-employed context. I think it's a profession-wide issue. I'm obviously asking you that because I think it's a fundamental problem that we don't know, or we as a profession don't necessarily are really clear on what that value is, and that makes it, if we don't know it, then no employer is going to know it, and and it's going to make it difficult for clients. And I think what you've done really well is, if you have a framework and you've got you align your own you align your own projects with what you need to generate, it makes it clearer for you. And I think that's probably what doesn't exist for most coaches. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a fantastic question, because it spills into a number of areas too, actually. And I think picking up something you said first about being able to discernibly look at what are your guiding principles and values as a person versus your value as a coach, and how you position yourself perhaps to be able to, within your contracts, acquire more salary or more remuneration within that. Certainly within self-employment, that was a point I came through. I was like, right, you're about to step into a huge market where you've probably got a very, very small voice. Social media isn't certainly something at the time I was trying to do a lot of, and I haven't got tens of thousands of followers or an influencer status or anything. So how do you position yourself to a point where you feel you are able to acquire an earning of your worth, so to speak? What is your worth? One of the earliest starting points, obviously, is to look at what's the market average, what's the setting standard, so to speak, and be able to then look at discernibly your age, your qualifications, and your insights, and how that pitches against the market average. But one of the things I would challenge with that also is that we shouldn't base our value or quality, so to speak, on the market average, because if you do, you're in the same boat as everyone else, and you're also saying that you accept that is the market standing with which I fit into. And of course, in a business setting, certainly within self-employment, you're looking to position yourself in an advantageous area where you're able to acquire a larger amount of the market than, say, other competitors. A really nice analogy with this is to consider a blue ocean against a red ocean. The red ocean is an ocean that's full of fish, lots of people doing the same services that you do, selling the same products that you have, and they're gobbling up all the market, all the fish. It's a red sea. The blue sea, on the other hand, is more quiet, it's less populated, less crowded, and therefore the competition is less. But that is only available to you if you position yourself and can communicate and distinguish what is your market USP that's different from all of those who fall into your age, you say you've got a bachelor's or a master's, or you've got a UKSA cert. How you position yourself outside of that setting to then discernibly be able to acquire what you feel your value is. So it's very much almost like a business lens that I'd put on that, to be able to look at values against value. Does that answer what you're getting at?
It's definitely a part of, goes somewhere to answer, from your perspective. I think the mentorship opportunities or the advice, I think, that you have is very valuable to a lot of developing coaches. I've had a 25-year career in S&C, and 17 of that has been without an employer. So I'm really interested in the way other people are addressing that, particularly those who've actually moved into this, the sector more recently, and therefore probably worked in more professional environments than I did, because it was a while back and it was very different. The landscape was very different. The field of strength and conditioning almost didn't really exist when I was in full-time employment. So yeah, I'm fascinated by by the insights that you bring, and I said for me, really interested in how, as almost as a referral, where we can send developing coaches and like this is a great pathway for them to be, or a great network for them to be involved in terms of getting support.
That's really kind of you to share those comments. And one thing I would say is that since turning self-employed, and by the way, when I started my career, that wasn't an avenue probably related to before that I was really seeking. But since stepping into this space, and as you mentioned, speaking with lots of like-minded peers and mentees, is that they all often come and face the problem that you've raised there, Ed, is that how do you command your market value? How do you separate yourself on the market? And how do you, let's face it, one of the reasons you go into business is because you want to become more wealthy. You want to, if you can, become financially free as well, and break from some of the challenges that we all face with, employment. It's not for everybody either, but the point I'm really coming to is that it's when you've kind of gone through the process of looking at where's the market and what's the market prepared to pay for, and then you pair that against, coming back to some of the values here that I had, which was family. One of the things I said to myself was, right, do I want to work with 50 people per month who pay me X, or would I rather work with 10 people per month who pay me Y? And then be able to distinguish between, right, so who might be in that market? What are some of their needs, and how do my qualities and credentials relate to individuals like that? So for instance, one of the things that I do is that, say, more of a premium or an exclusive service would be to working with CEOs, because very often they're hugely attracted to sport, the services provided to sport, the mindsets and the performance levels of those in sport, and they want to borrow a lot of those for themselves, whether that be to just get healthier, stave off aging, and or do better performance in the boardroom. And that's certainly one of the services that I've gone into, which is, through the experience of going in employment, I had to go through that journey to get to the stage where I felt confident enough to step into an environment on my own and deliver that as a one-man band, so to speak, but do so on a level that distinguishes me and does competition with others in the same marketplace. And then selling that becomes so much easier, which of course in itself is quite a contentious point, and one that very often as employed coaches, you're not having to acquire those skills either. So that, at least as a route to add a bit more context to it, is what I've done.
I really appreciate you giving me a bit of extra time to answer my question that was submitted at the DEF. So I really appreciate that. Thanks again. Thanks all.
Appreciate it.
No worries.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you both.
No problem. Guys, any more questions from anyone on anything? No? Okay, well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And like I say, the recording will come out, and we have a couple other, recording will be out with you in your inbox soon. So thank you so much, and have a great day. Cheers, guys.
Thank you all.